Welcome to a City Voices interview with Vesper Moore. Vesper is the founder of KIVA Center. Did I make a mistake? It's KIVA Center, right?
It's centers, plural, and I wouldn't
Oh,
say I'm the founder, I'm the chief operating officer. But yeah,
you're the chief operating officer. Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah.
wow. My mistake, but still a big job to do for the KIVA Center. And tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'd like to refer to myself as a mad liberation activist. That's my life's passion. I'm a psychiatric survivor, also an indigenous person of Taino descent, the Quisqueya tribe and Boriquen tribe. I am someone who's very passionate about peer support work, social justice work. As the chief operating officer at the KIVA Centers, we seek to decolonize a lot of our ideas around mental health, more broadly decolonize our ideas around human connection, and how we live often in a culture of isolation, and that connection is often where we can find healing.
And the KIVA Center during the pandemic has been very busy doing a large number of online groups of all kinds. I'm a member of the Hearing Voices group, and but there's a lot of them. And tell us about some of the things that the KIVA Center does.
Sure. So the KIVA Centers is a technical assistance center for both the state of Massachusetts, but also a bunch of states in the country and many different countries around the world. But more specifically, our work in peer support is rooted in 15 years of experience of having peer-run access and drop-in centers, of having a peer-run respite called Karaya, of doing a lot of work in the community, as well as a plethora of virtual groups and virtual supports that we have been doing since the beginning of the pandemic.
Now, Vesper, you identify as a non-binary person, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, now I hope you feel comfortable educating whoever watches this video about what non-binary means and how someone who identifies that way. Tell us more about that, please.
Sure. Being non-binary is experiencing and connecting with gender outside of what is binary. So what is male and female, what is woman and man more broadly, what is understood in those ways. Sometimes it's connecting with both at the same time. Sometimes it's connecting with neither. Sometimes it's connecting with many different identities throughout that. There are non-binary people who are trans, and then there are trans people who are not non-binary. So to be non-binary, again, is to identify with this idea of gender with yourself outside of that traditional understanding of gender. So like, for example, I, under the non-binary umbrella, identify as agender, which is more like an absence of gender. That I don't really identify with a lot of the gendered experiences we have in our world. It doesn't resonate deeply with me, so I experience that absence of gender.
How early did you identify with the non-binary quality?
When I was 12 years old, so in my preteens. Yeah, I think I identified with it longer, but I just didn't understand it that well. I think that there were a lot of expectations as to what in our society we deem as like, are the expectations of a man, what are the expectations of a father, what are the expectations of a brother, or people in that respect. And I was always like, why is this expected of me? It always made me feel very uncomfortable. always made me feel, you know, I always experienced a kind of a disconnection, if you will, from that. And then later in life, because I didn't know of non-binary identities, I thought I was you know, a trans woman. And I actually lived for a year dressing in what is, you know, considered in our society as women's clothing, as wearing makeup, as wearing, you know, hair extensions, wigs, as trying to pass in the way, because at the time you needed to pass for a year, in quotes, as a woman in order to get on hormones, in order to start that process. Eventually, I found that I wasn't happy that way either. I wasn't happy living in that way, and you know, I thought maybe I'd find more through that journey. Eventually, I learned about non-binary identity, and I learned about the many non-binary identities, I should say, under that umbrella. And then I was like, oh wow, that you know, this resonates with me. This idea of being agender.
If you hadn't discovered the non-binary way of identifying, you know, that term and what it meant and what it means, where would you be today?
That's a good question. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think about it and I wonder if I would even be alive still. Um, you know, I think about the fact that what it did for me was it made me realize that I wasn't confined to this idea of masculinity and femininity, and that I can try to live beyond it, be the example of living beyond it, right? And the reason why that's so important is because I'm also someone who is autistic, right? So a lot of these expectations around behavior and carrying myself, and the idea of what was, you know, acceptable and how you're expected to be, and a lot of the pressures around that, and then how I felt about my body, and self-loathing around my body, and self-loathing around the expectations of everything, you know. I think it, you know, on top of many other things, obviously, I probably would have taken my life. I probably would have killed myself.
Oh, oh, wow. Hmm. Did you come close to committing suicide?
Yeah, I mean, I am an attempt survivor. I've tried 3 times in my life. So um and I would say, you know, I have, you know, I mean, obviously I made the attempts, but I have come very close to dying through those experiences. Um and you know, even though when we talk about suicide, we have such a discomfort around it because it's such a taboo in our society to talk about those feelings. I think, you know, all, all of us, something that we have in common is that we didn't consent to being alive. We didn't consent to being here, right? And that there's a level of peace, you know. I Something that also really helped me in my life was Taoism. You know, the idea of the path, the idea of the way, the idea that like life is not inherently good or bad, it simply is. Like we exist, we are our being, it's all connected, and that there is love in that connection. Um, so so yeah, I mean, I had made those attempts, but at the same time, I wouldn't have it any other way because I've gained wisdom from that suffering.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
I do. I do. I believe in the idea that, and I mean, it's scientific as well, that energy can, it, it can't be destroyed, right? It can't necessarily disband completely. It cycles through ecosystems, it cycles through life, right? So in that way, yeah, I think energy, or how we understand consciousness to some way, does travel. Whether if it travels as one or many, I don't know. But yeah, I would say I believe in reincarnation.
Have you had an NDE? Well, I think you have. You've had a near-death experience, right?
I have. I have.
Can you tell us what you experienced being so close to death, or having died and come back? I don't know which one it was.
Yeah. One experience that I remember profoundly, and it actually wasn't from one of my suicide attempts. It was from, so when I was 16 years old, I was jumped and attacked. And I sustained a stab wound to the lung, right? I spent 3 days in a hospital here in Massachusetts, St. Vincent's Hospital. But at that time, as one does when you're stabbed in the lung, you start struggling with breathing, you start struggling with a lot of things. But as my consciousness started to fade, everything closed in and became black, and then it became white all of a sudden. And as that emerged, I felt this sense of inner peace that I have actually never felt in life. Um, I would describe it kind of like a glowing warmth around your body, not like a hug, but the feeling that you can receive from a hug from within yourself, the very tingles around your body, the weight being lifted off your shoulders, if you will. And then in that moment, I had heard the voice, only now are the times when you will feel peace, but it is not your time. Try to continue to live and find peace in your own way here. And it was actually someone who is a very close friend of mine today, and my former partner, who was wearing an ACE bandage. They were a trans person, and they wrapped that ACE bandage around my wound to kind of hold the blood in, and then they leaned me up. And then I felt what felt kind of like my body or the soul, or however you want to call it, just come back, not even down, kind of like back towards my body. I can't even describe what direction it was. And then at that moment, I had a rush of adrenaline, and the room started to spin, as you do when you wake back up. And I was very angry when I came back, and I think I was angry that I was alive and that I had felt all of that. But now I look back at it and I see it as a very profound experience of how can you connect to what is beyond our body and ourselves in a very spiritual sense while we are here, while we are living and dying at the same time, because life and death are one and the same phenomenon, right? Every moment that we live, we are also dying.
Yes, I mean every millisecond there's something inside our body that's dying and something that's being reborn. A blood cell, a tiny atom. I don't know anything. It's happening all the time, and it's the miracle that happens while we don't, and that we're not even conscious of, but is a part of our being. It's incredible. It's mind-boggling. Have you ever been in love?
Yes, I have been in love. I felt love many times in my life for, I mean, just and beyond romantic partners. I felt love for my friends. I felt love for my family. I felt love for people, for beings, right? And I think that that's always an interesting thing when you talk about love, because you can continue to feel love for people even if they hurt you, even if you're not continuing in your lives and talking to one another, or maybe you've grown apart, or maybe you've grown within yourself, right? But there's still beauty in that love and that experience of a profound wishing of like I sincerely wish the best for you and that you continue to feel that love, right? So yeah, I think I love the Ram Dass statement of be love. If anything, if you can be anything in this world, be love. Don't just feel love, but be it.
Ram Dass, I saw him before he died. I think he died, right? He was interviewed with Eckhart Tolle, and he was in a wheelchair and he could barely speak, but he was still, cognitive and alert, and he was able to answer questions. And someone asked him, "What are we? What are you? What are we? What am I?" And he said, "Loving awareness." Loving awareness, those two words. And he kept repeating that throughout the night. Have you ever been in so much love for for another person that you cried in their arms?
Yeah, I would say that, I felt that love towards many people in my life. I think in a way that is so overwhelming, because when you find love within yourself, right, and if it's truly in yourself, I think people are often like, I found love in this person, with this person, but you find that love because you've actually found it in yourself. So yes, I have had moments where I've cried from that.
Are you currently in a relationship?
I am, yes.
For how long?
Been in this relationship for 3 years now.
Are you in love?
Yes, I would say I am in love.
Cool. Very cool. So let's talk about the psychiatric peer movement.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it doesn't feel like there's a movement at all. It's not like, back in the 60s and 70s where people were really angry at the system and mobilizing and picketing and mass against psychiatry, against the mental health system. It seems like a lot of that fire maybe it's just simmering now. I don't know, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's interesting. So I would definitely say that what has occurred with the psychiatric survivors movement is the idea that in the embracing of a lot of ideas and in our understanding of a lot of ideas, and in being able to develop our own services inside, outside of systems, which I actually think there is no true outside of systems, because systems mindsets, like that exists in our everyday lives. We live that regardless of where you are, regardless of how you understand the world. But I do think something that is so important is that I think that we've diverged on a lot of ideas. You have folks who work more towards the anti-psychiatry ideologies, right? And you have people who work more towards the mad pride ideologies, right? Then you have people who focus on the more recovery movement ideas. You have people who focus on the more disability rights ideas and disability justice ideas. You have a lot of these different facets. And I think something that I find is so critical is that since Judy Chamberlain's passing in particular, and since the passing of a lot of activists, not just Judy Chamberlain, but the idea of mad pride and identity freedom has not as strongly been there. We've concentrated on psychiatric abolition and trauma healing and disability justice perspectives, but not the right to identity, and identity outside of psychiatry, identity outside of the mental health industrial complex, identity that is expansive, right? Going back to that idea of how we identify, and me being a non-binary person, right? The understanding that we can identify as mad, and this idea of identifying as mad is not only outside of psychiatry, but it's to really speak to anything that doesn't fall within the idea of convention is considered madness in our society. Any spiritual experience, any race class experience, any gender experience, all of these things that aren't within that convention, right, are considered mad. And that really mad is a conduit for this more expansive idea that we were speaking to earlier of deep spirituality and interconnection. It goes back to decolonization, right? And indigenous identity and a lot of those pieces. I mean, there were indigenous tribes that for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, had the idea of third, fourth, and fifth genders and ideas outside of gender. But they also had this idea of our ancestors and our elders guide us through our experiences of hearing voices and emotional distress and experiencing visions, and that peer support is inherent in that, right? That idea of that shared wisdom, those ideas of human beings connecting with one another, the idea of it is okay to cry, it is okay to feel this in-depth pain and suffering. It is not okay that you are oppressed by systems and horribly treated in our society, but your emotional distress it's not something that is inherently wrong with you.
Right. Our experience of madness in all its forms is really just a response to circumstances, and circumstances that we experience in our troubled society. Stigma. I read a book on stigma by Philip Llanos, who's a researcher here at one of the universities in New York. And he dedicates much of his book to something he labeled self-stigma. There's stigma from, of course, there's stigma from, the media and the community and people who don't understand, who don't understand like that madness is not necessarily always a dangerous, scary thing. It's something that people experience, and it doesn't always manifest as a serial killer, but that's not the message we're getting from media. So there's stigma there, but he talked about in large chapters self-stigma, the stigma that we experience after we receive a label of mental illness, that labels all of all the miraculous, often I call it spiritual experiences that we've had in altered states and all that. But then when psychiatry comes in and puts us in a box with a label, and the label has all this negative media attention surrounding it, then the self-stigma is what we, I received this label, I cannot move on with my life, I'm forever a freak, a loser, a damaged person. And to break out of that is really to be free enough to be able to pursue your dreams. But breaking out of self-stigma, maybe the most challenging of the stigmas. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I do think that this idea of stigma, this idea of internalized Satanism, self-stigma, that projection, that very idea that we internalize, right, is it really comes down to us trying to free ourselves from a carceral mindset, right? I think that that is hard to find. So what I mean by a carceral mindset is a mindset of incarceration, of punishment that exists in our society. The fact that for, when someone presents in a way, again, that is counter to the convention of what we understand as acceptable, of what we understand as dangerous, right? This idea of danger, and because we have a fear of our own danger or losing control, that we will willingly incarcerate other people with that mindset. But in that same breath, when you've had those experiences, or when you've been treated as an outcast for these reasons, you start to internalize, wow, there's something really wrong with me. There's like, I am experiencing this space. I am my relationship with other people, or my relationship to my existence and everything I understand is different from others, or different from how I'm told it's supposed to be. And sometimes that's trauma manifesting, sometimes that's a variety of things manifesting, and sometimes it is inherently spiritual experiences independent of that. And I think what's so hard about that internalization is really realizing how we do it to ourselves. When we say like, I'm so crazy, I'm so awful, why am I so, I'm a burden on everyone around me, I can't take care of myself, like I'm a danger to others, I should just stay away, right? And again, back to this idea of connection and finding healing in connection, that we end up pulling ourselves away, on top of the fact that society has probably pulled us away, right? And if you've been in an institution, often the idea of treatment is that if you are readily sitting within danger, instead of taking a moment to connect, right, we choose isolation, we choose harm.
So you mentioned connection as something very important to help an individual who's experiencing the internalized stigma. Can you talk about what do you feel someone could benefit from who can't shake the internalized stigma and is like incarcerating themselves, like you said, in their mind?
Mm. Mm. So are you asking what someone may need to shake that, or what?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think first and foremost, it's important to realize that everyone's journey, understanding of the world, connection and relationship to the world is different. But there is a line by Miriam Kaba that I really like, and it's hope is a discipline, right? I think a lot of people have this idea of false hope, or that hope isn't there, or that you can't have hope for yourself, hope for others, when, especially when things are hopeless, or especially when every time, what this idea of being a stable person, right? This idea of being a sane person involves being disconnected from those very emotions that you fear in yourself because of that internalized sanism, right? That we were talking about earlier. So what can often help is a person being present with you in that moment, and not necessarily letting go, but letting be the very existence of what is the struggle within you. And I think the fear of that, right, is what is that person going to do to themselves? What is that person going to do to other people? Are they going to hurt someone? Are they going to hurt themselves? The very idea of danger and being able to sit in danger, right? I think it sometimes does come from that willingness of people who will continue to work through hope as a discipline with you alongside your journey in the depths of that darkness. There's a quote by Leonard Roy Frank that is, "The light is not found by going around the darkness, but by going through it." And the idea is that that person walking through that journey with you, the very catalyst of the soul, right? To reemerge. And those breakdowns, right? Those mental breakdowns are often spiritual emergences, are often other states of being. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes people are like, oh wow, what was the meaning of that completely? Why did I experience that? And again, in the moments where it's not, it can be trauma manifesting, or maybe it is, and we simply don't know it is yet. But is anyone willing to have those taboo conversations of other states of being connected to other worlds, having that understanding of non-consensus reality and talking about our non-consensus realities?
Do you think peers would be willing to share those stories of those realities that they experienced in a group moderated by peers? Everyone sharing those experiences of altered realities and their own special realities, and there are all kinds of cosmic experiences that we have. You know, do you think that that could be a thing? Is that something KIVA might be interested in doing?
Yeah. I think in a very unofficial way, and in some ways official, because with our Hearing Voices support group and our spiritual support groups and those spaces, we do talk about these experiences. People do share, and they are facilitated by people with living and lived experience. But I think more importantly, it is the idea that more people are willing to talk about it, that more people are willing to share, that more people, and that it is more mainstream for us to talk about our non-consensus realities. And I think that the fear behind that is, as often as psychiatrists would say, is that would feed into a delusion that would further separate yourself from this reality.
Right.
But what is our very understanding of reality? And how do we come to terms, circling back, with the fact that we didn't consent to live this reality if we don't talk about the realities we experience?
Beautifully put. Now let's get back to hope as a discipline.
Yeah.
So is there a way to instill to train people in the discipline of hope?
I think so. I think it's important to be able to speak to the many truths that we hold in our society. I think right now people are so divided on the truths that they hold, right, that we don't often speak to them. The fact that two things can be true at the same time, and that we can exist outside of that understanding, or that we can submerge ourselves within it. So I think hope as a discipline, when we're talking about the psychiatric survivors movement, which I'll use this as an example because I think it'll help a lot. If you're talking about psychiatric abolition, for example, or eliminating oppressive systems, right, dismantling them, you can't simply dismantle unless if you have an idea that's centered in what the alternatives to those systems might look like, the alternatives to what our idea of of connection, right? And services are, right? Care work and what care work looks like. So you have to have hope to think of those alternatives. You have to have hope to have those ideas and to be grounded in the fight for those ideas and continuing in that way. And that we actually do have that hope and that drive and those ideas, especially when we speak to these issues. I think it is easier to let go of the hope and suffer within what is happening than it is to actually hold on to it and continue to feel let down when we don't get there right away, right?
I think from what I recall of our conversation, you brought up hope as a discipline in relation to the incarceral self-stigma, that type of thing, instilling hope as a discipline in someone who is currently incarcerated in their mind with the label of a mental illness and unable to get beyond that and live their best life. And so the discipline of hope you mentioned is something that could help a person in a situation like that.
Yes, I think it can help in the way of having hope in the way of we simply because we may feel understood by no one, we may have community nowhere, we may have love nowhere, we may have complete disconnection from all of these things, right? And everything that we embrace and express is treated as disease, as problematic, as terrible, right? It does actually take a discipline of hope for a person who will continue to be there alongside you in your journey. And it also takes a discipline of hope to be willing to open up, to be vulnerable when your experiences have been weaponized against you.
To be vulnerable. That takes a large amount of trust.
It does.
And I feel like someone who's also a person with lived experience is someone easier to trust, especially when, you know, unlike in a therapeutic relationship where the therapist doesn't reveal anything about themselves and just, you know, is in the helper mode. When you have genuine peer support, the peer is also sharing from their own personal experiences when appropriate, and that by itself, you know, saying, you know, it says, you know, you're not alone. I've had this experience, and I'm sure many people have, and this is what it was, and it's so similar to yours, and that's a wonderful way to build trust. And so the discipline of trust involves being vulnerable. The discipline of trust involves being vulnerable. The discipline of hope involves trust and the ability to be vulnerable. Can you tell us more about what is the training others in the discipline of trust look like on a concrete level, like, you know, like in a workshop or in a training seminar or something like that? Is this can this be put on paper? Can this be replicated? Can this be a transformative modality?
Yeah, I think a lot of activists, a lot of spiritual teachers, a lot of human beings, a lot of beings in our societies have, you know, kind of you know, touched upon that idea of the discipline of hope, and, you know, bringing it down and really carrying those ideas. It's not always called that. It's not always thought of in those ways, but to have a desire to, or a roadmap to transform our very society through our transformation of ourselves. That idea of being loving awareness, right? And what that loving awareness does within you and what that does for others. That idea of transformation, it does exist. People have written about it for thousands of years. I would say in a formalized way, in peer support, and what that could look like and what that could speak to, it would really talk about freedom of mind and body, and speaking truthfully to that internalized ideas that we have around our mind and body, the internalized ideas of what we think of ourselves, of what we think about others, of what we think about, you know, our world, our relationship to our world. It would involve not only sharing those stories, but it would also involve really being able to see within ourselves, within our world, what oppression we are internalizing within ourselves, within our communities, within each other, what harms, what pain, what suffering. You know, there's mutuality in suffering. There's mutuality in joy. There's mutuality in many of these things. And that is rooted in that connection once again. So I think it is through those sharings of stories, which have been true within many societies, many indigenous societies for again thousands of years, that we can find and we can free ourselves from that carceral mindset.
I think it was Alan Watts who said, the way out is in.
Yes.
And that's and that's the way of the Buddha, right? Who experienced in his early life, he was sheltered from all the pain and suffering and death in the world. And then he learned about it by escaping from the confines of his castle prison, and he saw the world, and he wanted to see, he didn't just want to see the world, he wanted to see like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the real gritty stuff, and then he somehow suffered tremendously, and through that suffering, like you said, you have to go through the darkness before you get to the light. He you know, according to the parables and what have you, he went through that, and he became enlightened, and then was moved to teach. He was begged to teach, like he was in a divine realm. The God said, please teach them. And so he did. And now I believe there's Buddhas everywhere. I mean, we're all, you know, the Buddha himself said, you're all Buddha, we're all Buddhas. But there are some Buddhas who are like awakened Buddhas, you know, and they're everywhere. I've experienced therapists who had that Buddha-like quality, and peers and whatever, and family. And so let me ask you this. If someone is has an open heart and believes with their heart that they are like Ram Dass said, loving awareness. Can these labels drag them down? Can anything drag them down? Can psychiatry drag a person with this way of being down? Can self-stigma have an impact on a person like that, who thinks from the heart, who has an open heart, who is loving, who is kind, and who acknowledges that they are loving awareness energy?
Yeah, I think it doesn't lessen that we're loving awareness energy because we have oppressive and painful experiences. I think we can forget and we have to remember. And I think, you know, when we talk about this idea of awakening and spiritual awareness and being beyond all of this and being interconnected, I mean, it's not even beyond, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's with you, it's with me, it's with all of us. It is truly in the very depth of, we can forget that we have inherent value and worth and love independently of everything else, and it's not contingent on what we can do and what we offer the world, but simply because we are ourselves, we are here. And I think it is easy to forget that, and painfully intentional too, when we think about psychiatry and mental health, because it's like, you have to be productive, you have to contribute to society in these ways, you have to be able to think clearly and logically and be this and be that. And if you aren't, and you aren't contributing to society, you are a problem.
Well, it was Meister Eckhart. He was a medieval priest, I think. He said, in summation of everything he said it's more important to be than to do. To be, and we're talking about loving awareness, so let's go with that, to be that loving awareness rather than to do, even to be a peer helping peers. It's more important to be the love than to even extend the love. And extension just happens naturally when you are the love. But rather than doing and like building a company that helps people or whatever, you know, and according to Eckhart, it's more important that you just be that than you build anything, which is, I think, a very important point, and it relates to some of the things you said. And so how can we as leaders in this peer movement create communities that help to build people into their own loving awareness, and, you know, and to be those people who acknowledge and feel and are free with their loving awareness? I mean, first we have to work on ourselves, right? We have to get ourselves to be this before we can come back and say, well, this is how I did it, and maybe there's a training module for it.
Yeah, I think it's being like the Dagara tribe, or like many other tribes who I think found that love, even in the darkness, even in those moments, and also cherished some of those visions and some of those things that they were hearing, some of those experiences that they had, and have a broader understanding, right, of what those experiences are. Because I think we're starting out, when we talk about, you know, diagnoses like schizophrenia, schizoaffective, like bipolar, all of these different diagnoses. We start with the idea of, clearly there's something wrong with me, I'm not supposed to be hearing this. And we're not often thinking of the more broadly, like, divine and spiritual messages that can be related to those experiences. I think more importantly, it's freeing ourselves from that idea of deficit, right? That idea of broken, that idea of of we are singularly this. And you can feel broken and you can feel that suffering, and that's all valid. You can feel ill, you can feel your experience can manifest in any way you choose and identify. And I think it's to have the freedom to do that first that is really liberating. And then it is through our connection with others that we continue to build on that idea, that we continue to emerge from this fog, from these ideas that we're supposed to criminalize our distress and treat it as singularly medical illness, right?
So what is your vision for the peer community in your lifetime?
My vision for this community in my lifetime. My vision for this community in my lifetime would be to see more crisis alternatives first, and more things led by us in community, right? That are sustained, that are truly led by us in its inception and its creation and in many places. And that it's not like, oh, there's a nice alternative, there's a nice space, but it's actually built into the very fabric of how we approach and have conversations around emotional distress. And then I think from there, and it's more after my lifetime, once we build more things like that, we can reach a point where we actually realize it's more sustainable in that way for us to share and connect with each other, and to actually not villainize those parts of ourselves, and to be able to embrace or realize why we harm others or harm ourselves or do those things, if it is that, right, that we can have a restorative justice approach, right? There's restoration and conversation and working together. And restorative justice also, again, being an indigenous idea of, you know, how do we mend when harm has been done, and instead of disposing of human beings, how do we again recognize that inherent value in each other? That's more after my lifetime. But I think when we build these things, we're building towards that.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you very, very much for speaking with me today. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I think one closing thought that's really important is that I think that there's often this contention with, is anything that I am doing in peer support actually going to amount to the change that I want to see in the world? And that there is in fact value for every single person that you support that finds that journey in self-transformation, that journey through inner space, as our movement has called it before. And through that reemergence, that changes our culture. And when you change culture, you can change institutions, systems, you can change interpersonal understanding, and then the understanding of ourselves. So you are doing that. You are doing that. And even if you don't see it in your lifetime, that your worth isn't contingent on, again, doing that work, but it is simply there, and that all of our worth is simply there, and to not be disparaged. And I think, again, when we talk about that discipline of hope, that to continue to have it, because that's truly what is going to liberate our society and build to community outside of a lot of the things that harm us, and then again return us to the earth, to our relationship to the earth, nature, each other, ourselves.